You're listening to In Healthy Company with Dr. Tim Stevenson. In this podcast, we're all about mental health and general well-being. We'll be interviewing guests and providing a safe space for them to discuss any mental health issues. For me, holistic health is far more than just not being sick. Please remember we're unable to give health advice on an individual basis. However, please do feel free to email us with your issues at wellbeing@thehealthycompany.com. and we may deal with them on the show. In Healthy Company today, I'm with Captain Chris Hall, a commercial airline pilot whose story has fascinated me from the times that I've sat around campfires or on long, dusty train journeys, mining his mind for his experiences through life and the way he's dealt with various challenges. In it, you'll hear the stories about his parents during apartheid in South Africa, and how Chris has moulded the charity trips that I first went on with him back in 2012. I hope you enjoy the programme as much as I enjoyed making it. Chris, thanks very much for talking to me.
Well, it's lovely to be here. Thank you very much, Tim. I feel honoured.
No, it's fantastic, and anyone at Virgin knows Chris very well. And Chris, tell me about South Africa. I mean, I know you very well, and I know that your place of birth is Johannesburg, and only today I found out a little bit more about you, and every time I talk to you I find more out about your mum.
We have lots of skeletons in our closets, don't we? And and the way the world is these days is that we're all of mixed heritage. So you've said, talk to me about South Africa and so on. You know, right now I feel as English as anything else. But you can't forget your ancestry. I was born in South Africa, it's true. But when I was 3, both my parents were in jail in South Africa for different periods of time. And so I lost my connection with South Africa because when I was 3, my parents were put in jail and they were banned. And we left South Africa in a hurry. And so South Africa was a place that I only got to discover much later on, really. In 1993, my parents were allowed back for the first time. So they, just like Nelson Mandela, although of course my parents weren't in jail, my parents were in exile for over 20 years. And they were allowed back in 1993. So I've only been able to discover my birth heritage from 1996. In fact, when Virgin started flying there. So I was a pilot, and it's one of those lovely coincidences that your employer begins flying to a place that you need desperately to reconnect with under a different set of circumstances. Absolutely. You know how wonderful and brilliant it was to see South Africa emerge democratic, which brings us on to the real issue, which is, you know, the wonderful legacy of parentage and my mother and father, who stood for all the right reasons, you know, for democracy and one man, one vote, and joined the ANC. So I think that's what you're alluding to, aren't you?
Absolutely, yeah.
My mother was a Jewish refugee from the Second World War, and my father was the great grandson of the first geologist to map South Africa. And they arrived. They met together at Wits University, and they were politicised by a number of things. Of course, a liberal instinct, and that's one of the great recurring themes of my own. You said you were going to ask me about my philosophy or how I thought about certain things, and if I could talk about one trait, it would be to have always consider your liberal side, to always consider the pain of being a refugee, to always think of, you know, to be empathetic in things, and that's exactly what they did. They were privileged white people in Johannesburg, but they had that lovely instinct to care and worry about what was right, and they reacted to a particular event called Sharpeville. Anybody who knows the struggle in South Africa knows that in 1960, 89 men, women and children were shot in the back during a peaceful protest. And my parents, very next day, joined the ANC, which was then a legal organisation. And over a number of years, it became banned, and my parents didn't go, we don't want to join, we better quit because it's not legal anymore. They were committed, and they went underground with that organisation, and that's in the end what got them into trouble. A quick story, my father did an interview with Nelson Mandela, the last big interview before he got jailed, actually, in the treason trial. So he was a reporter for the national newspaper, and both my parents were essentially gypsy journalists. They like to call themselves gypsy journalists because we travelled all around Africa as a family. My parents working as journalists after going into exile, and they were development workers too, working for the UN. My father did this interview with Nelson Mandela, and shall we say that whole period in my life was very formative, really, to see your parents and grow up with your parents understanding that they went to jail for something they believed in. It's a gift to receive that.
Absolutely.
You know, there's a quote out there which is that, you know, don't stand for nothing, stand for something. You know, in your life you should stand for something. And for me it was presented on a plate. I admired my parents enormously for lots of things, including their guts to go with their heart. And in that there were lots of challenges. But so South Africa and the emergence of a free South Africa was a wonderful resolution. They suffered terribly. You know, I think my mother had a nervous breakdown in jail, and she had 3 kids by that time. And so when you and I were on the bus together, Tim, I had lots of things to say, but it included an expression of the excitement of democracy and the opportunities to put things right. And I had many, many wonderful memories being in refugee camps with my parents in Somalia or Ethiopia. And
but you were actually a refugee at one stage.
Yeah, I mean, the act of leaving South Africa made my parents vulnerable. So when you leave a country, you're banned. You're not allowed to work there. If it's a very contemporary issue, isn't it, to see Syrians leaving Syria because their country is not functioning anymore, or they're unable to function in it. And look, that's what happened to my parents. And my father talked early and clearly about the lucky happen chance of the British consular official sitting next to my father while he was reporting on the treason trial with Nelson Mandela, turning around to my father and saying, "You're Tony Hall, aren't you, the news reporter who's been banned? Listen, I think you have some English relatives. Come and see me and I'll get you an English passport." And that act of generosity and empathy gave my parents the tools to be able to move around the world. You know, without that, we'd be on refugee passports. And I dare say we wouldn't. They would have struggled on many fronts. Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. And that, you know, I was speaking earlier about the aspect of community and the health of a community, the health of the people being dependent on the community. So like the individual, their health is dependent on the community's health is dependent on the individuals. And for you, your parents to be part of that, looking at what is their health of the community that seemed to be, I know I was growing up at the same time as you were, so I was looking at it from outside, seemed to be going down the pan or going, you know, inexorably into a spiral down. It would have been so easy for them to just say, "Yep, you know, we can't risk anymore."
Yeah, what is the bit of a person that makes them stand for the right thing, isn't it? So it's fascinating, isn't it? I'm bound to say that it's probably the luck of your upbringing and your own genes, really, because many people turn a blind eye to what's going on. Not everyone makes a stand, and I can't claim to have followed them with that same kind of principle. But I do categorize them as Africa optimists, and I hear many conversations around how Africa's a basket case. There's too much poverty, they're corrupt, and they call Africa a country, you know. And within that, there's so much room to describe Africa as finding its feet and being successful. You know, that visit to the Branson School of Entrepreneurship is an example of people affecting directly their own communities and being upstanding and starting from modest. You know, I mean, how many lovely things have you done, Tim? How many lovely things have we both created? And in that way, small things do matter, don't they?
Absolutely.
You know, yeah.
And whenever I think about you, Chris, I think about charity. And I know we do stuff together and we do adventures, and I got involved because Linda couldn't come on a particular challenge, and she said, well, why don't you go, Tim, as the nominal first aider.
Was that on
that
Cycle
was China.
India?
No, that was
China.
Was
that
the very first China war.
Tiger leaping?
No, the Great Wall.
The Great Wall, of course.
And I went to China with a bit of. I'm someone that, you know, used to think that I was really ill with Chinese foods and all that sort of stuff, and monosodium glutamate. I went to China and was absolutely blown away, A, by the culture, B, by the food.
Yeah.
I wasn't ill one bit. Whenever I ate, and I ate naturally, I thought, this is amazing. And it was just, anyway, that's talking about charity trips. But what motivated you? I mean, we've been doing the charity trips for 10 years now. You set them all up. How much have you raised?
Coming up to £1 million. Everyone who's participated, like your good self.
So all of us who do the trips, yes, we go to somewhere that Virgin usually flies to, and we can get to it.
And we pay for it ourselves, don't we,
and we
Tim?
pay for everything ourselves, and we raise all the money ourselves. So all the money goes to the charities. So £1 million is amazing, and
it is when you consider the journey is so rich and full of good stuff.
Each
anyway,
of us, exactly. So we, you know, Chris has this thing about you know, have fun, do good, and we do have fantastic fun. What do you feel that, you know, maybe there could be some other way you could raise £1 million? You know, you could raise £1 million doing some raffle or something. But the way you've raised it, from my point of view, you've enriched my life. You've enriched our life as a couple, me and Jackie. But what was your motivation, and what do you feel now? And I don't mean that in a sycophantic, that's fantastic, Chris. But what started it off, and how do you feel looking back on it?
Well, I think you never think so right now, more than 65 of those adventures. So the model is very different to others because it's about the collective total. It's not about individuals having to achieve targets. And so there's a focus on adventure and the richness of diving into other cultures, and the legacy of that can be charity and doing good stuff. So I think if I'm proud of something, it's that I've resisted pressure in the early days to establish a minimum fundraising level, for example. So I have been sure enough of myself to ensure that these adventures are sustainable. The reason you've come on a few, Tim, is because I've never turned around to you and said, you have to raise this amount, otherwise you're not coming. And you have a great charitable heart, but you only have a certain amount of friends who'll come and support you, no matter how good your cause is. So in the collective group, this whole model relies on a number of things. It relies on luck, the luck of having people who are good at fundraising, who get it. It also relies on new energy. So in the 60 people that do things on, typically that's a number that arrives for one of these adventures I organise, 20 people are new, and they're great at bringing in new energy, and they have an appetite for fundraising, and that works really well from a fundraising side.
But I have to say that
Yeah.
of those 20 people that come in, so of those 60 people,
Yeah.
every one of them is enriched as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's not just, you do a charity trip and you feel good about yourself.
Well, I think
It's
everyone
far
can have
more than that.
everyone
Far
can
more
have a
than that.
different entry point for adventure. So for some people, it's in fact a legacy of giving money and raising money, because as for example the Cycle India trip that we did together, Tim, and even the Cycle South Africa trip, we ended up in the community, and that can be the most enriching part of the whole journey. The rich layer cake of experiences that make up an adventure is the real success for me. So that when I sit and create something, one of the magic ingredients is, for example, drawing on the unique energy of what you might call Virgin Group, Virgin Atlantic. There's something that's fun-seeking about Virgin.
Yeah.
And I got that. I got the liberal side of Virgin very early on. I saw Richard bringing together a group called the Elders. I saw Richard talking about the environment. I saw other CEOs wanting to talk about profit and how to make more money. But I saw in Richard, obviously an adventurer. We all know that he's done these incredible things where he should really have died, but he survived. But also this other side, and I was lucky enough in the 27 years I've worked with Virgin. I joined Virgin when we had just 6 airplanes, so I came for airplane number 7, and I was in the years that I've been at Virgin, I've been lucky enough to do a number of things, including, like you probably, Tim, inaugurals, new things.
No, I was never invited, Chris. I
Never
wasn't
invited.
important enough.
Okay, well, you've got to be a pilot then.
I know.
Or somebody
Just-
nice.
Absolutely.
Nice.
I don't look good enough for them. Yeah.
I'm sure you've had your parties and your opportunities. But the point is that when Virgin was small and Richard was very hands-on, it was fun.
Yeah, no.
And so we had the adventures were a legacy of lots of things. But, returning back to the theme of fun, there's no point in life unless you can find some fun and magic in it. And Virgin were bloody good. And Richard was bloody good. I really do think it was top down in releasing a small amount of risk, or what could go wrong, and releasing that risk, taking it on in favour of everyone having a bloody good time. And I got that. I saw it firsthand. And when I became a middle manager for Virgin, I did a number of jobs which were fabulous and interesting. I felt empowered enough to dive in there with my own background. I mean, I knew Kenya, I knew India, I'd lived in India. My parents were working for Oxfam in India. They were press officers for Oxfam. We lived there for 2 years. Believe it or not, we drove back from India to England, through Afghanistan and Iran and all sorts of things. And one felt excited about the world. Virgin was all about flying around the world. And there's a moment where that all comes together, isn't there, Tim? And for me, it was I had climbed Mount Fuji on a trip, and people were constantly saying to me, "God, I'd love to do that." And I said, "Well, just go and do it," But they seemed to need help.
Yes.
And it was a, you've organised things, you've done lots of things, and for me it was easy to say, it's beautiful, I know how to do it, I'll organise it, and
come along if you want.
you come along if you want. And so I did the first Mount Fuji climb. 60 people came. I poked my nose into our charity department. There were nice people in it, and I said, listen, we're going to climb, and we might as well climb for something, so how about something, and they were kind enough to say, well, Chris, you define it. And so I did. And we climbed for water pumps in Kenya. And we had a fabulous climb. And at the end of that, there were loads of people who wrote to me and said, Chris, I think you did something. I'd love to do it. I'd love to do it. And I organised it again the next year, and I decided to take everyone who climbed over those 2 years to visit the pumps that we'd paid for in Kenya, in rural Kenya, and everyone came with me. And before I knew it, I had a bit of a following, and I was interested in how many exciting and interesting things there were to do, and off I went. I'd lived in Kenya, so that was easy. So I decided on a Mount Kenya climb. Most people were thinking of Kilimanjaro, but I fancied something slightly different, and that is a recurring theme of mine, to go for something slightly different. And next thing you know is that you can't stop yourself. My wife Anne is long suffering in some ways, because it is fun, isn't it, Tim? You've done something. So what do you love about the adventures then? Because
I'd love to. Sometimes when I go on things where I'm thinking about my responsibility as a medic.
Yeah.
And I have to remind myself that, like, actually I'm not the medic on there. I might be somebody who's a first aider. But I'm there to enjoy myself as well. I'm there to actually say to people...
You can't escape your leadership role, or at least your medical role, can you?
I know.
It's one of the great...
But I also... It is a privilege to be involved in that sort of level, but it's also sometimes a bit of a burden. And yet, I think with these trips, it's not a burden, because we set it out at the start and we say, look, I'm on holiday as well. Yeah. I've raised the same amount of money as all the rest of you. Yeah. I'm not here as a paid volunteer. And then it's the meeting the people, the shared journeys, like physically the shared journeys. And I was talking to Max, one of our FSMs recently, and we were talking about how you get to know people, and you really cannot not get to know somebody if you've been pooing in the desert together, or you've been, you've had to literally pick somebody out of the dirt after they've fallen over coming down the mountain. And there's been so many friendships that we've formed, even though we already worked in Virgin, the closeness that we've got to people, and not just in Virgin, because Virgin's, the families that would come, the wives that would come, the partners. So we got such a fantastic group of friends out of all these trips.
I mean, you touched on something which is interesting to me. The adventures I've created, which invite Virgin staff, but of course another proud boast is that they are not inward facing. They allow Jackie to come along, Anne to come along, and even friends to come along. Your kids have come on some adventures, and my kids have too. Is that those adventures for us employees are a real disruptor. So, but for some shiny thing that says, come and climb this mountain or come and cycle here, our work journey would be, obviously some stuff that's offbeat, perhaps an evening party or this or that, but not much that goes beyond a day or a night. And these adventures are a wonderful tool for disrupting your work journey and throwing the net far wider. Look how many people we've got to know that aren't anywhere near where we would normally work.
So what is our community now?
Yeah, exactly.
So our community and our emotional well-being, because of our, going back to what I said earlier on about being part of a community, being part of your mental well-being, that enriching your life enriches your health.
Yeah. Gosh, I mean, I can think of one individual who came up to me and said, "These adventures have turned my life around."
Yeah. And
in that description, they're merely saying they've given them some purpose and opened up a friendship circle and given them a community.
Yeah. Exactly.
I can think of two people for whom that statement has real power. It really did. They were in a rut.
Yeah.
And so it's wonderful. And
so, Chris, I know I've been with you because you and I have made some safety decisions. Some, do we do this part of the trip? Do we do this? Do we do that? And I also know, because I've worked in the Virgin situation, what it is to be a pilot and managing stressful situations, dangerous situations. I'd just be interested in your mindset. And I was chatting to you earlier about this, about how a lot of people will think in sort of the emergency situation, when I've been in resuscitation situations or a crowd situation where something's happening and I lead it, sort it all out, and everyone goes, "Oh my God, thank God you're just so calm, you're so cool about this." And I am the most anxious person some of the time. One of the reasons I'm doing these podcasts is that it's therapy for me. But as a pilot, how do you handle those situations? And I'm not, for the nervous flying public, I'm not talking about emergencies. I'm talking about the day-to-day things, about how do you reverse into a corner in a car? How do you fly a plane? How do you deal with those things that, a bit of turbulence, a bit of lightning?
Well, I recognise your description of being cool during the event, and then after it, thinking, "Oh my God, that was interesting, Jesus," and this and that, and so I recognise that, and that just must be our profession and our training coming into play. So the flying profession is all about managing a task and not being overly emotional and distant from it.
Yeah.
So there's a checklist, you run the checklist, and I've been a training captain for 20 years, running simulator checks and airplane checks on pilots. And I can think of very few pilots that reacted in the moment in any other way than to simply get on with it to the best of their ability. Of course, how we respond to it afterwards, so the event is over, and as we all know, aviation is terrifically safe, so the worst we can say is that we survived the event, but it wasn't perfect. And there's often an instinct to discuss an element of it which you felt you could have done better, and that's healthy and a wonderful part of it. But my own particular view on that description of you being your heart racing and so on tends to manifest itself in a kind of exhaustion, rather than an identification that I was overly struggling or something. I'm blessed with an opinion of myself in which I'm mostly bound to the rule of, did you try your hardest? Did you, and the analysis after the event is mostly could I have done better? And maybe my traumas are very different to your traumas in medicine. They are mostly theoretical, I'm happy to say. They're mostly in the simulator.
Yeah.
So, what have I experienced as a pilot? I've been a pilot for 30 years. I haven't even experienced an engine failure, Tim.
Great.
I haven't... what are my most dramatic events? They've been events that have been around the margins of safety, never directly anywhere near. So I'm maybe typical or not. I'm not sure.
I've been reading the book by Matthew Said, and Matthew, if you're listening, reply to my text and agree to come on the podcast. But Matthew's got this great book called Black Box Thinking, and it's about improving, taking into life what a lot of aviation does, which is look at when things go wrong, what could have been done better.
Yeah.
I've got another theory on safety, and specifically in aviation safety, and it's about looking at what's been done well. So looking at how 9,999 or 999,999 times out of a million things go absolutely perfectly.
Yeah.
And learning from those rather than waiting on the one thing that's gone wrong to learn from.
Oh, that's such a
Well, it's safety
powerful.
too. It's not my idea, but
Yeah.
my thoughts are that, like, there used to be this sign going into the CAA at Gatwick that said safety is no accident, and you still see that in some places. And to me, that's totally missing the point. It's a bit like health and well-being. Health and well-being is not merely the absence. This was the World Health Organization definition in 1948 was health is not merely the absence of disease. It's a complete state of physical, psychological, and social well-being. So safety is not merely the absence of accidents. It's good performance. It's, so it's taking all the good things. So
It's not measuring the one thing you can measure, the one disaster that you can identify.
No.
It's more the...
It's measuring the other things.
Yeah,
And as we move forward in aviation, and this may be a bit contentious, but with flight data monitoring and all the stuff we can pick up both in the simulator and at the end of a flight and even on the engines, we can look at how things go so well whenever they could have gone wrong, and then learn from that and build on it.
It's not too often we're talking about
Exactly.
the negative side of safety within aviation. It's mostly positioned so that we are always in agonizing over getting it right. And there I am, 20 years training. I was the training manager in our airline, looking after the introduction of a new type, and I'm enormously impressed by aviation's positioning of that, alongside all the other good things. So, for example, within Virgin Atlantic, we've always been properly resourced. In every corner of the airline, one has seen great safety culture. Engineering, cabin crew, aviation medicine, CRM, all those different departments.
Chris, the other thing that I know you love is your football, and I've played football with you on fields in different parts around the world.
Did you score in that game? I think your son Harry did he?
Harry scored.
Harry scored. I think I scored.
Did one of my wonder shots, the Stevenson rocket. But I've also played on pitches that have had goat's poo on it and Durex.
What a privilege that was.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah. But how important, you've played semi-professional football. How important is sport to you in well-being?
Well, it's a really good question, and I'm going to say it's a wonderful. If you've been gifted. A little bit of talent.
In football, are you?
Obviously, I never made it, so I'm rubbish, really, or can't cope under pressure or something. And I've got, a healthy dose of my own weaknesses. In the World Student Games in Japan, to name drop, there I was the goalkeeper for Great Britain playing against Mexico, and I must confess that one of my weaknesses was distribution. So this is before Grobbelaar and all sorts of goalkeepers who were inventing a new way of distributing, and all I could do was either hoof the ball up or throw it, and I never really mastered the art of throwing it. I sort of looked at my defender, and in those days English footballers didn't love being given the ball by the goalkeeper. It was mostly hoof it up. Anyway, I threw it to what I thought was my left back, and the Mexican forward intercepted the ball and scored, and we lost the game 2-0. So I'm full of my own. In fact, in Shoreham, I also threw the ball into my own net as a semi-professional goalkeeper. So I was probably bloody brilliant on some days, but absolutely rubbish on other days.
I used to tell people that there was only one thing that kept me out of the Northern Ireland team, and that was that I wasn't good enough. Football
is. So let me wax lyrical about football. Football is the world sport. I grew up in Africa, like I said, and that meant Kenya and Tanzania and a few other places. And my ability to play football gave me local friends, and it's a leveler, as we all know. And I took that and loved it, and I got my second job in aviation as a result of football. I was made unemployed by Air Europe, and I flew out to Malaysian Airlines on a punt, knowing that they wanted pilots, and there were 8 pilots being interviewed, and I was the first to be interviewed, and he looked at my CV, and I had the bare minimum number of hours flying a 737, and the chief pilot, Captain Uwe, said, you don't have much experience, but I see you played football at a very high level. You've got the job. Will you play for the airline? Yes, you've got the job.
Brilliant.
So I played for the airline. In fact, I had professional trials for their number one club, and made many friends and played for the airline, and was totally, shall we say, able to integrate myself into local culture with local friends, very different from all my colleagues who had, no ability to do that because it wasn't something they could do. So football's been wonderful. Like you said, Tim, I use it as a tool on the adventures to bring us all together. It's a brief interaction with the community. Of course, our adventures are more or less 6 or 7 day affairs, and we don't have much time to relax and engage. But one way is football, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's a valuable tool. And it's a beautiful game, isn't it?
My son plays football in America, and he plays with Mexican teams. He used to, when he lived in New York, he would play with anyone who, was a bit of fun to play with. So he was playing for the Mexican teams, for the Brazilians, for whoever. But yeah, it is really part of becoming part of your community, and football for me, in Brighton here, Albion and the community is a really
look at what you've done for your local football club. It's amazing. Isn't it? What a journey! I mean, how much richer is your journey for what you've done?
Absolutely. I was in professional football for nearly 20 years, and there's some bit. Well, in fact, there's none of it I regret. There's some of the bits that I'm a bit sad about, but there's lots of bits like the shirts that are around the room here. That
never have too many shirts. I remember flying the England football team to Austria for the training camp in 2010, and I was under strict instructions not to pester them.
Okay.
But of course, I ignored that completely,
Yes.
particularly with my charity hat on.
Exactly.
I got 2 shirts from the local sports director or whatever it was,
Yeah.
and promptly invited. Well, I was told by the manager of the logistics as we were waiting on the tarmac at London Heathrow. He asked to see me, so I let him in, and he said, I'm under a bit of pressure. The whole England team are a bit cross with me that we're having to wait for an hour. We got on board so quickly, and now we have to wait for an hour. Could you make an announcement? And I said, listen, I'll tell you what, I'll do one better. Bring Fabio up and I'll tell him myself. And he went, oh, that's brilliant. So Fabio Capello came up, and we had a good hour together in the cockpit, and I asked him whether we were going to win the World Cup, and he laughed. And in fact, my son will be a bit embarrassed to say that he gave me his starting 11 for Fabio for the 2010 World Cup.
Oh, your son gave him the starting 11?
Yeah, so I had it in my bag and gave it to Fabio Capello for to give him the starting 11. I'll have to ask my son that.
Yeah.
But anyway, he signed a couple of shirts. And so I have 2 shirts with rather useless signatures on them.
That you can't recognise anymore.
No, you can't recognise anymore.
Can't recognise.
I had intended to... I had that moment where I thought, shall I flog them off for charity now before the World Cup? But no, they're going to win the World Cup.
Yeah.
So I'll keep it and then I'll flog it after the World Cup. Of course, they got knocked out by... Who did they get knocked out by? Anyway, can't remember. They played the USA.
I've been in the same situation. Be in the privileged position as the team doctor. You travel with the manager and you're sitting there. And Mickey Adams especially was a really good friend of mine. And James and Harry used to text me with the team. He says, come on, Tim, let me see what they've said. So he would look at what the 2 boys had said the team should be.
Yeah.
And he never took any notice. But
I'm not sure there's a sport like football for taking you on a worldwide journey. The number of World Cups, the number of integrations that I've had, on a scruffy patch of grass.
Chris, I hope everybody feels, when they've been listening to this, that the sense of the adventure that we've had, but also like the enrichment that you've brought to my life, to our life, to so many people's lives, and to your own life. Actually doing it.
Yeah, no, absolutely right.
wonderful
It's a real privilege to be able to create 65 adventures. More than 3,000 people have done them, and they're modest in many ways. They are we have not climbed Everest in doing any of them.
No.
But we have we have done some things that we regard as interesting and precious.
Absolutely. And the people, everybody I know that has done it has been enriched, and we've been enriched by meeting them as well.
We're lucky to have met each other on the journey, aren't we?
Thanks very much, Chris.
Lovely talking to you, Tim.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
I hope you enjoyed listening to that as much as I enjoyed chatting with Chris. And another podcast you might want to listen to is my discussion with Max Longan, the lovely Max, as I called it, as he raises some interesting issues around South Africa and Buddhism. And if you did enjoy either of the podcasts, please do consider rating them or even leaving me a review, as all of that helps us get better known. Thanks again for joining me in Healthy Company. You can find out much more at my website, thehealthycompany.com. If there are any areas of health and well-being that you would like us to explore in future podcasts, or you have any feedback, then please do email me at wellbeing@thehealthycompany.com. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.